Welcome to Revenge Stories with Papa, where real stories of betrayal, loyalty, and hard-won justice are told with honesty and heart. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end and drop the city you're watching from in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. At my son's wedding rehearsal dinner, my daughter-in-law stood up in front of 40 people, pointed at me, and said, "He's the reason this family can never move forward." My son looked at his plate and said nothing. I sat there with my water glass in my hand and didn't move a muscle. I didn't cry. I didn't defend myself. I just smiled, set the glass down quietly, and excused myself to make a phone call in the parking lot. That call lasted 4 minutes. What happened over the next 6 months? They are still trying to understand it. My name is Gerald. I'm 63 years old, and I spent 38 years building a regional food distribution company out of a rented garage in Columbus, Ohio. Midwest Provisions started with a second-hand refrigerated van, a handshake agreement with 2 local farms, and the kind of stubbornness that only comes from having nothing to fall back on. By the time my son Tyler was in middle school, we were supplying grocery chains across 5 states. By the time he graduated college, the company employed over 200 people. I tell you that not to impress you. I tell you that because what I'm about to share only makes sense if you understand what I had built, and how completely invisible I had allowed myself to become inside my own life. Tyler met Cassandra at a marketing conference in Chicago when he was 28. She was polished in the way that certain people are polished, the kind that takes real effort to maintain and requires an audience to feel worthwhile. She had a sharp mind and a sharper tongue, and I told myself those were assets when I first met her. My late wife Carol would have seen through it immediately. Carol had a gift for reading people that I never quite inherited. But Carol had been gone for 4 years by then, and I was still learning how to trust my own judgment without her. The first year Tyler and Cassandra dated, things seemed fine. She was attentive at family dinners, asked questions about the business, laughed at my jokes. But I noticed small things, the way she'd redirect conversations away from my stories, the way she'd look at her phone whenever I was talking, the way Tyler would glance at her before answering even simple questions, like he needed permission to have an opinion. When Tyler told me he was proposing, I hugged him and meant it. I wanted him to be happy. I wanted what Carol and I had, 31 years of genuine partnership, of building something together, of being each other's first call when anything happened good or bad. I believed, the way fathers often foolishly believe, that love would be enough. I was wrong. The engagement changed things quickly. Cassandra began treating me less like future family and more like a problem to be managed. She never said anything directly. She was too careful for that. But the invitations to dinners became less frequent. When Tyler and I would make plans, they quietly get changed. When I offered opinions on the wedding venue, Cassandra would smile and say, "We'll take that under advisement," which, I learned, meant it would be ignored entirely. What I didn't know then, what I only understood much later, was that Cassandra had been building a very deliberate case against me to Tyler for months. That I was controlling. That I was intrusive. That my involvement in the business made Tyler feel like he could never truly become his own man. She planted these ideas carefully, the way you'd plant something invasive, slowly, at the roots, where you can't see it until it's taken over everything. Tyler had been working at Midwest Provisions for 5 years by then. His official title was Vice President of Operations, a title I had given him because I believed in him and because I wanted to prepare him for leadership. What I hadn't anticipated was that Cassandra would reframe that title, in Tyler's mind, as evidence of dependency rather than opportunity. In her version of events, Tyler was trapped. In my version, I was preparing to hand him everything I had built. The rehearsal dinner was held at a restaurant in the Short North neighborhood of Columbus. It was a Thursday evening in late September, cool enough that people were wearing light jackets and the city looked the way it always does in fall, a little golden, a little tired, the way things look when they've been beautiful for a long time. I arrived early. I always arrive early. Carol used to tease me about it. I was seated at the head table because Tyler had insisted over what I later learned was Cassandra's objection. There were 42 people in that private dining room. her parents, her siblings, their friends, a handful of people from Tyler's college years, and a few colleagues from the company. Cassandra's mother sat at the far end of the table and spent most of the evening watching me the way you'd watch a dog that hadn't bitten anyone yet. Things went sideways over dessert. I had made a small toast. Maybe 3 minutes. Nothing fancy. I talked about Carol and how much she would have loved seeing Tyler so happy. I talked about teaching Tyler to drive in an empty parking lot when he was 15 and how he backed the car into a shopping cart corral and tried to blame the wind. People laughed. It was a good moment. I thought it was a good moment. Then Cassandra stood up. She held her champagne glass and smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. And she said she also wanted to say a few words. She thanked everyone for coming. She talked about how much she loved Tyler and how excited she was to build a life with him. And then, without any shift in her tone, without any warning, she turned and looked at me directly and said, "The only thing I hope is that Tyler and I can finally build that life without interference. Because Gerald," and she used my first name, not Dad or Tyler's father, just Gerald, like I was a stranger, "has been the reason this family can never fully move forward. And after Saturday, that changes." The room went very quiet. I looked at Tyler. He was looking at his plate, his jaw tight, his hands flat on the tablecloth. He did not look up. He did not say a word. I have thought about that moment many times since. About what a man is supposed to do when his son won't defend him, about what loyalty means and whether it can be restored once it's been surrendered to someone else. I sat there for a full 10 seconds. I counted them without meaning to, and then I folded my napkin, pushed back my chair, and said, "Excuse me for just a moment," the way you might say it if you were going to the restroom. I walked through the restaurant and out into the parking lot. The air was cold and I hadn't brought my jacket. I stood between two parked cars and I called my attorney, a man named Robert Hines, who had handled Midwest Provision's legal affairs for 22 years. Robert picked up on the third ring. I told him to pull the shareholder agreement. I told him to review the employment contract we had on file for Tyler. And I told him to begin drafting the documents we had discussed 18 months earlier, documents I had prepared as a contingency and prayed I would never use. Robert asked me only one question. "Are you certain?" I said yes. Then I went back inside, finished my dessert, shook hands with people I may never see again, and drove home to the house where Tyler had grown up. That was a Thursday. By the following Wednesday, Tyler no longer had a job. I want to explain how that happened, because it matters. When Tyler joined Midwest Provisions, I had structured his compensation generously. $185,000 base salary plus profit sharing, a company car, and full benefits. What Tyler and Cassandra did not know was that his employment contract, which Tyler had signed without having an attorney review it, contained a standard clause. Either party could terminate the arrangement with 60 days' notice, and in the event of termination by the company, severance was tied directly to the employee's length of tenure and conduct. There was nothing punitive in the termination. Robert handled it cleanly and professionally. Tyler called me the morning he received the certified letter. "Dad." His voice was different than it had been at the rehearsal dinner. Smaller somehow. "What is this?" I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, looking at the backyard Carol had planted 20 years ago. Her rose bushes were still there. I'd been keeping them up, badly, but keeping them up. "It's what it says it is," I told him. "Your position at the company has been eliminated. You'll receive your full severance, health insurance through the end of the year, and a letter of recommendation. You're firing me 2 days before my wedding. I'm restructuring a role that no longer serves the company's direction." There was a long silence. I could hear Cassandra in the background, her voice low and urgent. "Dad, you can't do this." "Tyler," I said. "At your rehearsal dinner, your fiancé stood up and told 40 people that I have been the obstacle to your happiness. You sat there and agreed by saying nothing. That tells me something important about the kind of partnership you've chosen. I've decided to honor that partnership by giving it exactly what it asked for: independence." I heard him exhale sharply. "This is revenge." "This is clarity," I said. "There's a difference." The wedding happened on Saturday. I was not invited. Or rather, the invitation that had been sent 3 months prior was quietly rescinded through a voicemail from Cassandra's mother, who said the couple had decided to keep the ceremony intimate. I spent that Saturday driving out to a lake house I owned in Hocking Hills, about an hour southeast of Columbus, where Carol and I used to spend long weekends when Tyler was small. I sat on the porch and watched the water and didn't feel as bad as I thought I would. What Tyler and Cassandra did not know, and would not know for some time, was how thoroughly their lives had been quietly underwritten by decisions I had made years earlier. The apartment they lived in, a 2-bedroom unit in a nice building in the short north, had a lease that Tyler believed he had secured through his own good credit and salary. What he didn't know was that the building was owned by a property management company that was itself a subsidiary of a holding company I had established in 2009. The management company had received quiet instruction years ago to give Tyler's application priority and to keep his rent at a rate that was, let's say, considerably below market for the neighborhood. The marketing consulting contract that Cassandra was so proud of, the anchor client that gave her boutique firm its credibility, had come through an introduction made by a colleague of mine named Dave Patton, who ran a regional retail chain and owed me a significant favor from a business deal we'd done in 2014. David liked Cassandra well enough and thought she did competent work, but the introduction that landed her the contract had come from me at a charity dinner, 2 years before I'd ever seen signs of who she really was. The country club membership they used on weekends, Tyler's name was on the account, but the founding member who had sponsored his application was a man named Frank Guerrero, who was on my company's board and had done so as a personal courtesy to me. I am not listing these things to sound powerful. I am listing them because I want you to understand something that took me a long time to understand myself. When you love someone, you build scaffolding around their life without even realizing it. You make calls, you open doors, you smooth things over, and you do it so quietly that eventually the person you love forgets the scaffolding is there, or worse, decides the scaffolding was always the problem. By the 3rd week after the wedding, Tyler called again. His voice had changed again, less angry now, more uncertain. The lease renewal on the apartment came back at $3,400 a month, he said. We've been paying $2,100. Something changed in the management company. Market rates adjust, I said. Another pause. Dave Patton's company dropped Cassandra's contract, said they were moving marketing in-house. Businesses make those decisions, Dad. His voice was careful now, like someone walking across ice. Is any of this connected to you? I didn't confirm it. I didn't deny it. I said, Tyler, do you remember what your mother used to say about consequences? He didn't answer. She used to say that consequences aren't punishment. They're just reality catching up to choices. You and Cassandra made some choices. Reality is catching up. I hung up and went to tend to Carol's roses, which were in worse shape than I'd admitted to myself. The call I had been half dreading and half expecting came on a Tuesday evening, 6 weeks after the wedding. It was Cassandra. She had never called me directly before, not once in 3 years. Gerald. Her voice was controlled, but I could hear the effort behind the control, the way you can hear the frame of a house creaking in wind, even if the walls look steady. I think we need to talk. All right, I said. I know you think I turned Tyler against you. That's not what happened. What happened then? A pause. I encouraged Tyler to develop his own identity outside of the company, outside of your shadow. That's what a good partner does. By humiliating his father in front of 40 people 2 days before the wedding. Another pause, longer this time. That wasn't. I was expressing something I'd been carrying for a long time. It came out wrong. It came out exactly the way it was intended, I said. I wasn't angry when I said it. That surprised me. Cassandra, you are a smart woman. You knew exactly what you were doing. You were establishing the terms of the marriage in front of witnesses, that Tyler belonged to you, not to me, that I was the past and you were the future. I understand the strategy. I just want you to drop the pretense that it was an accident. Silence. What do you want? She finally asked. Nothing from you, I said. That's the honest answer. I don't want anything from you. Then why are you doing this? The apartment, Dave's contract. I'm not doing anything, I said. I'm simply no longer doing the things I was doing before. There's a difference. She hung up. 2 weeks later, Tyler showed up at my door on a Sunday morning without calling first. He was wearing jeans and a jacket I'd given him 3 Christmases ago, and he looked tired in the way that people look tired when they haven't been sleeping, rather than when they've been working hard. Those are different kinds of tired. I let him in. I made coffee. We sat at the same kitchen table where I'd sat the morning I called Robert Hines. And for a while we didn't say anything. The house was quiet, the way it gets quiet when you've lived alone in it long enough that the quiet stops feeling like absence and starts feeling like the house itself breathing. "I didn't know," Tyler said finally. "About the apartment. About Dave's introduction. About any of it. I know you didn't. How long has it been going on? The support. I thought about it honestly." "Parts of it since before you were born," I said. "I've always just tried to make things easier for you where I could. It's what parents do. You don't notice the scaffolding when it's been there your whole life." Tyler wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. He has Carol's hands, long fingers, the same way of holding things carefully. "She says you're trying to control us, that this is you proving that we can't exist without you." "What do you think?" He looked up. "I think I don't know anymore." He paused. "I think I've been so focused on becoming my own person that I let Cassandra convince me you were the obstacle to that, when actually you were just my father. Who made phone calls? Who opened doors? Who showed up?" I felt something shift in my chest when he said that. The kind of shift you feel when something that's been held very tight for a long time finally loosens. "She's not wrong that I was involved in too many things," I said. "I should have let you fail more when you were younger. I should have let you struggle with the apartment search on your own. Let you network for your own clients instead of making calls on your behalf. That's on me, Tyler. I built your dependence by solving problems you should have solved yourself." "But she should have talked to you," Tyler said, privately, not at the rehearsal dinner in front of everyone. "Yes," I said, "she should have." We sat with that for a while. "The company," Tyler said. "I know I can't just come back, but I want to understand the business, really understand it, not as your son, as someone trying to learn. Is there any version of that that's possible?" I looked at him for a long moment, at the tiredness in his face and the something underneath it that was starting just barely to look like honesty. "Not yet," I said. "Not while you and Cassandra are still working through what your marriage is actually going to be. But I'm not closing the door. I'm just asking it to stay closed for a while." He nodded. He didn't push. Before he left, he stood in the doorway the way he used to stand when he was a kid, coming home from a friend's house, and didn't want to come all the way inside yet. 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Not quite ready to commit. "Dad," he said, "I'm sorry I didn't say anything at the dinner. I should have said something." "Yes," I said, "you should have. I was afraid of losing her. I know. I didn't think about what I was already losing. I didn't have anything to add to that. Sometimes the truest things don't need a response." I watched him walk to his car and drive away, and then I went back to the kitchen and called Robert Hines to tell him to pause, not cancel, just pause, the additional restructuring we had been discussing. The months that followed were not a movie. There was no dramatic reconciliation scene, no moment where everything was forgiven over a single meal. What happened was quieter and slower than that, and in some ways more real. Tyler and Cassandra went to couples counseling, which Tyler told me about only because I asked directly. He said Cassandra had initially refused but agreed after their financial situation made it impossible to keep pretending that everything was fine. They moved out of the Short North apartment and into a smaller place in Clintonville, closer to my house than they'd ever chosen to be before. Cassandra took on new clients, smaller ones she'd found herself, and Tyler started job hunting in earnest for the first time in his adult life. He got rejected 11 times in 4 months. He called me after the 11th rejection, not to ask for help, but just to talk, and I sat on the phone with him for an hour while he processed what it felt like to build a resume that had to stand on its own. "Every interview," he said, "they ask about my time at Midwest Provisions, and I have to explain that I left, and they always ask why, and I never know what to say." "Tell them the truth," I said, "that you had a family business opportunity, that you learned a tremendous amount, and that you decided you needed to develop skills in an environment where your last name didn't open doors. That's not only true, it's something an employer will respect. He got a job the following month, operations manager at a mid-sized logistics company in Dublin, Ohio. $92,000 a year, which was considerably less than he'd been making, but He called me the day the offer came in, and I could hear something in his voice I hadn't heard in years. Pride. Not the secondhand kind that comes from inheriting things. The real kind. Cassandra was harder. I won't pretend otherwise. The wound she had opened at that rehearsal dinner didn't close quickly, and there were months when I had no contact with her at all, which was fine with me. But in February, about 5 months after the wedding, she called me again. This time her voice was different. Not controlled. Just tired. "I want to apologize," she said. "Not because things have gotten hard. I want to be clear about that. I'm not calling because I want something. I'm calling because I've been in therapy, and my therapist keeps telling me there's one conversation I'm avoiding." "This one," I said. "This one." I let her talk. She talked for a long time. She talked about growing up in a family where her father had controlled everything through money, and about how when she met Tyler and saw the same dynamic, a powerful father, a son who deferred, she had been determined to break it. She said she had confused protecting Tyler from your influence with protecting Tyler from you, and that the rehearsal dinner had been the ugliest expression of that confusion. She said she was sorry for doing it publicly, and that she was sorry she hadn't tried to talk to me like an adult before it reached that point. I listened to all of it. "Cassandra," I said when she was done, "I appreciate you saying that. I want to say something honest in return. Okay, you were not entirely wrong. I was too involved. I made it too easy for Tyler and too hard for him to discover what he was capable of on his own. That wasn't love. It was anxiety. I was afraid that if I let him struggle, he'd feel abandoned the way I felt abandoned by my own father. And so I went in the opposite direction and smothered him with support until he couldn't see the floor beneath his own feet." "You saw that? You were right about it. You were wrong about what to do with it." Silence. "That's more generous than I expected," she said quietly. "I'm not being generous. I'm being accurate. We didn't become close after that. I want to be honest about that too, because I think stories like this sometimes get wrapped up too neatly. Cassandra and I are not close. We are civil. We are occasionally warm. At Christmas dinner, we sat across the table from each other and talked about her new clients and about Tyler's promotion and about a trip they were planning to Portugal, and it was fine. It was normal. After everything, normal felt like a gift. Tyler came by the house alone one Saturday morning in March, 9 months after the rehearsal dinner. He brought donuts from a place in Grandview Heights that Carol used to love, which told me he'd been thinking about the visit long enough to do that deliberately. We sat at the kitchen table again. I made coffee. The rose bushes were just starting to show new growth through the late winter mud. "I've been thinking about something," he said. "About the company." "Tell me." "I'm not ready to come back. I want to be clear about that. I need to keep earning things on my own for a while. But I've been thinking about the company's distribution contracts in the eastern Ohio region. There are 3 or 4 grocery chains over there that I think are underserved. And I know some people from my new job who have relationships there." I raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like you've done some research." "I've been doing a lot of research." He smiled, and it was Carol's smile. A little sideways, a little careful, like it didn't want to presume too much. "I'm not asking for anything. I wanted to talk to you about it. Like colleagues. If that's something you'd be open to." I looked at my son across the same table where I'd taught him how to read, where we'd done his science fair project about soil erosion, where we'd sat the morning we buried his mother and didn't know what to say to each other. He was different now. Not healed. I don't think grief and humiliation and loss leave you healed so much as they leave you shaped. But he was more solid somehow. More present in his own skin. "I'm open to it," I said. We talked for 3 hours. Not as father and son, or not only as father and son. as two people who understood the same business from different angles and who were, cautiously and honestly, trying to find out if there was still something worth building between them. There was. There is. I believe that now in a way I wasn't sure I did 6 months ago. I still live in the house in Columbus. Carol's roses came back strong this spring, better than last year. I've gotten better at pruning them, which turns out to be mostly about knowing when to cut something back so that it can grow the way it was meant to. You have to be willing to take the shears to the parts that aren't serving the plant anymore. You have to trust that what's healthy will survive. I think about the parking lot a lot, the cold air and the phone in my hand and Robert's voice asking, "Are you certain?" I think about how 4 minutes can change the next year of everyone's life. I think about how the point of those 4 minutes was never revenge. Revenge would have felt different, would have needed an audience. What I felt making that call was simply the decision to stop holding up scaffolding that was keeping people from knowing their own strength. You can love someone that much. You can love someone enough to let them fall, and to be there, quieter, further back, watching, while they figure out how to stand up. That's all I've got. If any of this touched something in your own life, drop your city in the comments. I read every single one. And if you've been carrying something heavy in your own family, some version of a rehearsal dinner parking lot, I hope this helped you find whatever it is you need to make your own call. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened, not just with Cassandra and Tyler, but with my own part in how things got to that parking lot in the first place. And if there's one thing I keep coming back to, it's this. What you build for people and what you build in people are two completely different things. And for too many years, I confused them. I gave Tyler everything I could reach. The job, the connections, the apartment he thought he'd earned, the introductions he thought he'd made on his own. I told myself it was love. And it was love, I don't doubt that. But it was also fear. Fear that if I stepped back, he'd struggle. Fear that struggle meant failure. Fear that failure meant I hadn't done enough, so I kept filling in the gaps before he ever knew the gaps were there. And what that did, quietly, over years, was teach him that the gaps didn't exist, that life was just easier than it actually is, that doors opened on their own. Cassandra saw that. She was wrong about what to do with what she saw, and she was cruel in how she handled it, and I won't pretend otherwise. But she wasn't entirely wrong about what she saw. That's the part I had to sit with alone, in Carol's garden, in that quiet house for a long time. What I've come to believe, not from any book, not from any philosophy I was taught, but just from living 63 years and watching what actually happens to people, is that character is only ever built through friction. Through the thing that doesn't go the way you planned, through the rejection, the budget that doesn't stretch, the job application that comes back with a no. Tyler getting fired from his own father's company and going out into the world with a resume he had to defend on its own merits. That was the most important thing I ever did for him. Not the trust, not the connections, that. And Cassandra had to face what it meant to build something real without the anchor client that had come through my network, without the apartment subsidy, without any of the scaffolding she hadn't known was there. It was hard. It was supposed to be hard. The hardness was the point. I think about Gerald, myself, at 24, in a rented garage with a second-hand van and 2 farm contracts and no safety net at all. Nobody made calls for me, nobody smoothed the path, and I am not going to sit here and tell you that suffering builds character automatically, because it doesn't. Plenty of people suffer and come out of it bitter and closed. What builds character is suffering that you choose to learn from. That's the difference. That's always been the difference. Tyler chose to learn, slowly, imperfectly, with a lot of Sunday morning conversations over coffee that I'll keep between the two of us. But he chose it. And that choice, his, not mine, is the only thing I'm actually proud of. If you're watching this and you've been the parent who fills in the gaps, who makes the calls, who smooths the path, I'm not here to judge you. I did it for decades. But I want you to think about what you're actually giving when you do that, because sometimes the most loving thing you can hand someone is the chance to find out what they're made of when you're not holding the scaffolding up. That's what I know. That's what this cost me to learn.